Welcome to Keyboard Studies 1A. This is an explanation, just in case you haven't made it to class, about how our brains work when we are learning piano. If you've ever played another instrument that is just a single line, or if you're a vocalist, you've never had to use both of your hands doing independent things at the same time, and rather complex independent things at the same time. Sometimes people who play a saxophone or a flute will have used their hands independently, but not to the extent that you do for the piano. So I'm going to give a little bit of an explanation about your brain and how it works so that you know what you're up against as you start to learn the piano as an adult. The first thing to know is that the brain looks a little bit like this. It consists of two hemispheres, the left and the right. The left part of your brain controls the right side of your body, and the right part of your brain controls the left side. When you look at your hands, they are a mirror image of each other. And this is a bit of a trick of how the brain works. It tries to manage your body in mirror image, so that when we do anything with our hands, the primary way of working for your brain is that it's going to imitate with one hand what the other hand is doing. That's our major problem when we are learning piano. You'll soon find out as you start practicing that our brains don't like to do independent things with our hands at the same time. Now, basically what happens in between the two hemispheres of the brain so that your body can work independently on either side is that it has a little bridge between the two hemispheres. And that bridge is a bit like a highway of which neurons can go from side to side of the brain, communicating with the two sides to ensure that they're working together. When you start learning the piano, or anything new for that matter, whenever you start to learn something new, the neural pathway between the two hemispheres of the brain needs to be created. So when you are learning something new, the neurons from one side of the brain to the other are creating a new pathway so that they can go from one side to the other and from this side to this side. At first, that process is very, very slow because the neuron has to find a path, and then it needs a lot of repetition of that exact same path to work effectively in the future. That's why at the beginning of learning piano, it's going to feel very slow at the beginning. But once that neural pathway is created, the lovely thing about your brain is that it probably will never forget that pathway again. So once it's set, it's there, and you can draw on it for many years after that. So our important work in this particular semester, this first 6 months of learning how to play piano, is to set patterns that will help your brain to get it working effectively across the two hemispheres. We're going to try and get that neural highway or pathway between the brains working effectively. But it does require of you lots of slow and pedantic practice, going through things over and over and over again until you can get them right. The problem with our brains is if we make a mistake and we create a slightly unusual pathway, neural pathway, the brain is almost always going to choose that pathway rather than the correct one. So while you are learning something, it's very important that you get it right every time. And if you make a mistake, stop, start again, and get that pattern going. Later on, when you are doing more advanced piano, you'll find that you have to let go of that technique of going through things very slowly, particularly if you are performing. At that point, when you are playing in front of people, those neural pathways already need to be set and they need to work quite fluidly. The other thing that we're going to be learning in this particular module is getting used to seeing music in front of you and converting that into using your hands. So we're using the eyes going in here. If you're a singer, you've used your eyes before to see the words in the music and you've converted it to your voice. Now we're using our eyes and they're coming down into our hands to convert into actual muscle movement. Okay, your body isn't creating the music so much with your voice anymore, but your hands are using muscular movements to create the music out of an outside instrument. So that takes quite a lot of getting used to, particularly locating a written music note to an actual note on the piano. You'll know that when you notate something in the treble clef or the bass clef, it indicates the exact pitch which you need to get. So when you are learning piano music, you need to be able to find those notes easily and quickly. So we'll be doing lots of exercises where you translate what you're seeing on the page into what you need to be able to find with your fingers. Eventually, you will not need to look at your hands to find the notes. Your hands will know where to go. It's a bit like when you learn to drive a car. At first, you have to look at the gears all the time to make sure that you're going into the right gear. But eventually, your brain creates the neural pathways so that it doesn't even need to think about it. Eventually, it just does it. So that when you've been driving for a few years, you may find that you can think about all sorts of other things while you are driving. The same is true of piano. Once you have started getting those neural pathways going and the patterns of your hands going, those pathways will be faithful to you for the rest of your life. So these 6 months are very important. They're establishing important principles in your brain so that you can transfer what you see into muscle movements, and that your brain can establish very strong and correct neural pathways for your future as a pianist. This, as I've said, takes a little while, and as an adult in particular, it takes longer than if you were a child. There are studies that show that children who start playing the piano or any instrument, but primarily the piano at a young age, that bridge between the two hemispheres of the brain is actually larger than in most other people. So it has created so many neural pathways because it's required so much of the player's hands that they can think in new and exciting ways. But for adults, that bridge is already set. It's not going to get any bigger or any smaller. So we have to use existing space, and that's why it takes so long. Try not to get too disheartened by the fact that things take long. If you can think to yourself, I'm setting a very good foundation in these 6 months, then you will find that in fact later on in your progress as a pianist, you will make a very, very quick progress. So be patient with yourself and do this very thoroughly.